Hello and welcome to this month's edition of the RPA The Player's Voice podcast. This month we're joined by Great Britain's 7-star Eloise Hayward. In the last 6 months, Eloise's work has been published into the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, entitled Role of the Menstrual Cycle on Performance and Injury Risk. We're here to chat all things about this to discover what she has learned from this process. So, Eloise, let's start at the beginning. Eloise, tell us what made you, want to research and undertake stuff in this sort of area.
It's sort of an area I've had an interest in since I was probably about 16, to be honest. I remember having conversations with teachers at school saying, ACL injuries are massive in women's sport. Why aren't they researched more? And then it wasn't until I was doing my degree in biomedical science that I had a lot of friends around me in the rugby scene and the football scene tear their ACLs. Like myself, I've suffered with ligament injuries in my ankle. Just surrounded by female athletes at the top of their game, have no reason to be injured, and they are having catastrophic injuries. That was difficult. And I thought there's more research that needs to be done. I was Googling, I was asking questions to physios, and they weren't educated enough. We weren't educated enough as players. And I thought, well, if no one's going to do it, then I may as well take the research on myself. And that's sort of where it went from there. I always had an interest in the impacts of the menstrual cycle on athletic performance and injuries in female athletes, specifically, rugby and football. I guess that's the sport I play. So I thought, why not apply it to myself? And that's where the paper came from.
So tell us, just to break it down, how, what were the basic findings? What did you discover as part of the dissertation?
So we found, there's quite a lot. So I broke it down into topics, into categories. So I looked at the psychological effect, the performance effect, and the nutritional effect, because I thought that was something that's never really been looked upon before. And I found that there was over half of our population, so my study group, had sustained an injury whilst on the menstrual cycle. And injury, we categorize that as anything from ligament injury, bone break, concussion, muscle injury. So we're talking, if you've torn your ankle, if you've torn your ACL, you've done your meniscus, anything like that. And over half of the population group had sustained an injury whilst on the menstrual cycle. So I did it all on a form basis, on a questionnaire. I handed it all out to every single PWR club. There was ask a girl that I knew in every single club if they could drop it in the group chat. And then I was playing rugby league at the time as well, so I dropped it into all the Super League group chats as well. And we got there was a bit of a basis. You had to be 18 years old. You had to be playing in the Super League or the PWR, and even better if you could specialise that you were an international rugby player. So we had international 7s players, international 15s players. So this is, coming from top flight women's rugby. And I had over 300 respondents. And the significance of the fact that we had over half of the study group sustain an injury. And then we delved deeper into the psychological side. So we looked at the effects of white shorts, for example. The IRFU no longer play in white shorts for the women. And there's a significance of 54% of women found that they were psychologically affected whilst on the menstrual cycle, whilst playing rugby. Whether that came from pulling out of tackles, having lower confidence, lower self-esteem, just felt like they weren't with it. They had a bit of a fog, or they just had an awareness of the kit they were in and how they felt. So I left, people, questions were, yes, no, or they were closed questions, but there was always an additional comments box at the end of each one. So people could just kind of tell me what sort of injuries they sustained or if they had anything else they wanted to talk about. And some of the comments, came across the lack of awareness from staff. So one of my main questions was sort of around comfortability. So how do you feel to discuss with staff that you're on your menstrual cycle and you're sort of struggling? And it was about 80% said they wouldn't bother saying anything. And that was striking because I just thought, okay, maybe that's just a me thing. Maybe it's just a personal thing. Maybe I wouldn't speak to staff. I mean, since doing this paper, I'm now like, I will shout, from the rooftops and stuff. Like, look, this is going on. This is the crap. This is what I think. But yeah, previously, before doing my study, I probably would have been one of those players who's like, oh, I'm not going to mention it to staff. It doesn't make a difference. I said, okay, but if you were to speak to staff, who would you speak to? And majority of respondents said it would have to be a female member of staff, and it was normally a physio, an S&C, or a manager. And then they'd probably try and get them to feed it into, obviously, male head coaches. And that was a part about education, is the fact that as female athletes, we aren't educated. So one of the questions as well was around education. Where did you get it? How much do you have? Like, how well informed do you have? And majority of respondents again said they felt they weren't educated enough. And when asked where it came from, self-research or school. And I'm sorry, but the education you get at school it's not gonna, it's nothing to do with your athletic performance. It's a very basic overview.
What surprised you the most in it? And is there anything that maybe you couldn't investigate further at this time, that maybe you thought in the future that you might like to pick up again?
Yeah, definitely. So I looked into sort of training adaptations that could happen. So one of the biggest points of the research was that Chelsea Women's Football Club, I mean, I'm an avid Chelsea fan, so for me that was pretty good. Yeah, they honed in their Super League wins, their FA Cup wins, their County Cup wins, that amazing league run that we had, to the Fit Art app, which is an app to track your menstrual cycle. All staff have access to it as well. So you can log how you're feeling, you can log your symptoms, your eating, your training. It's kind of a good way to just keep an eye on you. All staff have access to it, and you can see sort of how a player is progressing. It's like, okay, their menstrual cycle's not as usual as, what's going on. You could check in with players, that sort of stuff. You can adapt their training. So if one player, maybe was a little bit off the boil, it's like, look, don't do, extra scrimmaging today, go have a nap. It was really good. Same for the US national women's football team. So when they won the World Cup in 2019, they actually dedicated their win to the fact that they were menstrual cycle tracking and profiling their players, their squad. So they were able to know when to push players, when to make players recover better, what to do, and how to sort of adapt around squads. Now, I know football squads are a lot smaller than rugby squads. There's on average 40 of us in a squad and 20 of them. So it's easier to keep an eye on footballers than there is rugby players, and they've got a hell of a lot more stuff. But I thought that's probably something we could try and introduce into the women's premiership, or if we start at the top and we go, say, international women's rugby, whether that's we start in the sevens where there's a smaller group of us, or you start in the 15s where you have the resources. If you could look into training adaptations, you're building their profile on players and saying, this is her, her average period, her average cycle. Okay, these are her average symptoms. Okay, what's going on today? And maybe check in with the player. I'm not feeling too good. Okay, let's maybe rein you in. Let's pull you back. Like, if you were to go to a physio in the morning of camp and say that my hamstrings is feeling a bit niggly today, then you're probably going to be managed in training. But it's so taboo to go to your physio in the beginning of the morning and say, do you know what? My period is killing me. I'm not sure how much I can give you today. You just wouldn't say it. And even if you did, your physio would be like, all right, cool, yeah. You do you. And it's like, you have to self-manage these sort of things. And I mean, that's a big overview. There probably is a lot of physios who would know what to do. But I think the lack of education we have from a professional athlete point of view, it's not there. So that's definitely something I'd like to look into further, is what adaptations can be put into place. Is that people's gym programming? Is that people's training adaptations? Is that just building menstrual cycle profiling? And you can go down a rabbit hole. Like, I'd love to look into writing a second paper on the adaptations you can do. And at the end of my paper, I wrote in the conclusions my sort of advice so far of what I could give, what I'm educated enough to give from my research and my findings. But there was definitely a rabbit hole, and something that I found interesting that we couldn't touch base on so much. And I'd love to probably do further research on it. But the effects of the menstrual cycle and concussion, that was big. And that's something that I like to look into next is, does getting a concussion interrupt your menstrual cycle, which then can impact injuries in the future? Because I know people who have had concussions, they've come back, they've even made, offhand comments saying, my period's a bit messed up. You think nothing of it as a player. You're like, I just think nothing of it. and then they go and get injured post-concussion. You think it's not coincidental enough. Like it's too many people for it to be coincidental. So yeah, that was sort of the case. I think, yeah, that would be what I'd like to look into.
I mean, this is probably a broader point, but obviously there's just a lack of research when it comes to, what are your feelings towards this? But there's a lack of research in general when it comes to women in sport and sports science. You know, just what are your initial thoughts from this, really?
Do you know what? I was so surprised when I started doing my paper. So I thought, I'll get on Google Scholar, I'll find them. There'll be papers. There will be papers. I've got this. It's fine. Because at first I was thinking about doing, a systematic review. I thought, yeah, this would be banging. Could not find enough papers. That's why I had to move to primary research and write my own paper. So at first it was really annoying because I think I didn't realize the sort of laid back attitude we have towards it. You could be at training and you're warming up, whatever, and we yap as girls obviously whilst warming up, and someone will say, oh, so and so she's done her ACL. You're like, oh, no way. So what are you doing this weekend? Like we just drop it into conversation, and you just think, that would never happen anywhere else. No. That would just never happen. And when it happened in the men's game, it was a big deal. When Ntamack missed out on the World Cup, it was huge. When the South African captain, when he did his ACL, massive news. If you were to see superstars like an Anton Dupont do his ACL, I think it would be headline news, and it would be, how do we prevent this in the men's game? Well, funny enough, we have, I think in women's top flight football alone, there was 67 ACL injuries last season. 6 coming from Arsenal. Like one club alone had 6. We missed out in the World Cup without our captain, without Leah Williamson, without our golden boot winner Beth Mead, and yet nothing was sort of it was mainstream news, and it was I was gutting, she's done her ACL, oh, not another one, and that's sort of the mindset we had to it. So then when I started doing all my research and looking at these papers, it was baffling to me that most of the research for female athletes in performance sport was based on male data. It was all based on their data. It was all based on their knee strength, their testing, their that. But we're so biologically different to men. We've got different hip angles, knee angles. We've got a menstrual cycle. Like we've got hormones fluctuating around our body that causes ligament laxity and bone, calcium density to be pulled out of bones. It just baffled me when I was writing my introduction, and I was having to say, like, most data at the minute is based on men. So, this is one of the first papers to involve female data and actual first-hand primary data from female athletes. There's been ones just before mine, which was based on footballers, but that was a very small pool. It was about 11 players from the WSL, and it was more interview based. Fine, maybe a little bit more in depth because you got to have an interview and it'd be a bit more personal. But smaller pool, so you can't really say your findings are as significant. Whereas this, we had, a massive pool, massive sampling, but we need further research. It doesn't end here. I think one paper isn't gonna fix the issue. So yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing what the PFA, Leeds Beckett, I think it's FIF Pro, Nike. So I'm interested in seeing what comes out of that. I live near Leeds, so hopefully might see if I can go and give them.
They just have words.
You want to give me hands?
Has the findings in any way changed the way you prepare as an athlete?
Definitely. I think it's definitely changed the way I approach training. Like I said before, I was definitely one of these players who sort of viewed menstrual cycles as a taboo. Someone brought up in the changing room, I'd be like, okay, moving on. So, it's something I just sort of would skirt around. So throwing myself into my paper was really good to push me out my own comfort zone. But yeah, it's definitely changed the way I prepare or I train in general. So before it would be a case of, I've got a speed session to do and it's heavy today. I don't feel like I'm firing on all cylinders. Okay, well, why are you not firing on all cylinders? You're like, well, what stage of my cycle am I at? Have a little look, and you're like, okay, that's why. Let's rein it in a little bit today so I can fire again tomorrow. Or it would be a case of, okay, let's warm up. Let's thoroughly warm up today. Let's pull all the activation out, everything. Let's get the rehab in, make sure nothing goes. And if mid-session it's like, no, you're seriously not firing, it's not okay. Just having that, that emotional maturity to be like, look, pull yourself out. You're not going to be Superman by doing a session. Like, just pull yourself out. And I think that's something is sort of maybe matured in me, is because when I was younger, I definitely would have been like, oh, what the hell, and just kind of cracked on and been like, yeah, I need to get through this and grit and bare my teeth. And don't get me wrong, there are times where you need to push through, because if you're going to face your menstrual cycle in World Cup finals and things like that, you're definitely going to push yourself through. But I think adrenaline's going to get you through that than doing a speed session on a Tuesday. But so there's a slight difference in maybe the event. But yeah, it's definitely changed the way that I approach training and matches, for sure, making sure I'm fully prepared and I'm fully just aware. Yeah, definitely.
And you spoke earlier about the education side of things and how people just aren't educated on this. But what in your opinion anyway, what more could be done to empower women to learn about, to empower women about their menstrual cycle and the ways of raise awareness when it comes to training and match play and things like that? Is it, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think because as women, we're aware that it's a topic we probably should talk about. We just don't talk about it. It's like when you should do something and you just don't do anything about it. I think it's just having that confidence to sort of spark conversations within your club, within your national team, spark conversations with other players, maybe ask what they need in that moment, maybe just having that sort of education of, look, this is how your menstrual cycle can impact you. Like, let's talk about it. Like, let's actually discuss how people feel, because menstrual cycles are so individualized. They're so different for everyone. I can't sit here and say there's a one size fits all, because there's not. I give a generalized opinion, but every player is going to be different to another one, especially those who take contraception and things like that. Everyone's going to be looking different. But I genuinely believe that at the start of the season, we have to do our gambling talks, our drugs talks, supplements, etc. Maybe if in the PWR or things like that, we can slot in an education slot of, let's talk about your menstrual cycle, even if it's a 15-minute presentation on, here's some things you could do, or here's some things you should be aware of. I think a lot more people, it would spark them to do a bit more self-research, or even just kind of be a little bit more aware of what's going on in their own body. But it's just definitely just speaking about it and making sure it's not a taboo topic, having coaching staff who are approachable and saying, yeah, okay, like, I'll happily speak about it with you. Because that was one of the massive things, is most athletes didn't want to be deemed as weak playing out a session because of symptoms, or not being able to come to training because of symptoms or things like that, or not feeling like they were firing right. It's a macho culture. I get it. We play a contact sport. We play rugby. I understand. Yeah. But there's a difference between looking weak, not training well, and getting injured. There's a massive difference. So if you can open up those lines of conversations, whether it's between medical staff and players or actual coaching staff and players, like, one of the massive things that I found was like 88% of female top flight sports. So we're looking at rugby, football, basketball, AFL. They're all run by male head coaches. So there's that barrier anyway, of just not knowing, and that's not the male head coach's fault at all, because they've never experienced it. They just don't know. Yeah, they've never experienced it. They've probably never even considered it as something they probably need educating on, because they're too busy looking at tactical maps and training maps and things like this and sessions that probably not, it's that 1% that they've probably never looked at. But if teams are dedicating World Cups to it and Super League titles and FA Cups, then it's probably something we should look into.
I think you just alluded to it there, but then is there, how do you think sporting, organisations, clubs, programs, things like that could adjust to, in light of your findings? Would you recommend, I guess it's a more generalised thing here, but would you recommend certain things for certain clubs or programs to do straight away or in the near future or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it would be good for clubs to get straight into the whole menstrual cycle monitoring and profiling of players. I know we have a lot of players coming in and out a lot through extended squads or going to Six Nations, Pac 4, etc. I know players are coming in and out, but I know as a general, most clubs now, we do a wellness in the morning or training, etc. And there is a question in there that says, are you on your period, blah, 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 what day are you on? But what then is used of that data? Are we constantly tracking it? Are we then saying, oh, do you know what? she's off from usual. Like maybe we should check in, like, you know, because that, as a female athlete, that is the first warning sign. That's like getting in your car and, you know, getting a warning light on your dashboard. Something going on in your menstrual cycle is the first warning sign. It's the first sign of, okay, injury's going to happen here, or something's going on that we need to check. So if you can start to build this data of menstrual cycle monitoring and profiling, and I'm not saying this all on staff, I think as players, we should probably take a lot of ownership and say, look, we'll monitor our own and we'll flag if something's wrong. Completely fine. There's squads of us that are massive. I understand staff have not got the time or the resources. But I think that's probably the first place to start, is where, you know, okay, what's she looking like? What's going on? Can we help in any way? Because we have the medical resources to be like, oh, okay, are you lacking in iron? You know, what's your diet looking like? How are you eating? Are you fueled? And just then probably having the, I don't really know how to phrase it, but yeah, the ability to turn around and say, I need my training adapted today. Which is something so difficult. Like even I will struggle myself after doing all this research, going up to staff and saying, I probably need to take it easy in the gym today. And if you kind of say it to an S&C, they normally kind of go, oh, why? And you're like, oh, my menstrual, you know, on my period. They're like, all right, yep, no, fair enough. So like most S&Cs get it. Like if you just got to pull yourself back in the gym one day, don't feel ashamed. Like you've got to do what's best for you and your performance. But yeah, no, those would be the top sort of three things for me: is education, menstrual cycle profiling / monitoring, and just any form of training adaptation.
Do you reckon we'll ever get to a place where coaches and S&C coaches and head coaches don't consider it a taboo subject?
I'd like to hope so. I'd like to hope we get there. I think we're moving towards it. I think we're moving more towards a bit more of an open sort of society within sport in general. I think thanks to the Lionesses and what they've done for football, I think that is having a knock-on effect to the rest of us in other sports. So I think, yeah, the ACL research going on right now, whether they're looking into the menstrual cycle as well, I actually don't know, but I know obviously they're looking into ACLs. So hopefully they'll touch a topic on that. Yeah, I'd like to think so. Like I know, for example, the Wales women, they have Jo Perkins, their head of physio, and she's really, really big into looking at menstrual cycles, pelvic floor, that sort of stuff. So I think if we can, you know, get more staff on board with that, the better. It's just winning over the staff to convince them that this is the 1% that probably could make a difference in a Premiership final or World Cup final. Yeah, it's probably just convincing them that sometimes maybe looking at the athlete well-being and injury prevention is as good as looking at rehab plans when they are injured. Like, why not try and prevent it before it happens?
How does it feel to be a published writer in the International Journal of, I've got it written down, the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health? Fancy title. Yeah. But how did it feel to first see that when it first got published?
It was quite surreal, to be honest. I'd never really wrote the paper with the intention of being published. I just sort of wrote the paper because I had to do my dissertation and I wanted to do it on something I was interested in. It wasn't until my dis tutor said to me, this is actually quite good. I mean, it was the actually that got me. That sold it for me. It was like, this is actually quite good. And I thought, it didn't have to be actually. But it was such a timely topic that at the time when I was writing, obviously, Leah Williamson done her ACL, Beth Mead had done her ACL, Zoe Harrison had done her ACL. Like these big names in women's football and women's rugby were injured. And just as we got published, Sam Kerr did her ACL. So I was like, look, this is timely. This is a timely topic. And yeah, that was it. We sort of went for publication and got it first time, just because they were like, there's no research in it currently. So it's one of the main papers. We actually were given top 10 most read paper in January or February. So we were literally top 10, which is really cool. Like getting emails like that and getting my, you get a certification of publication. This is in my room, in my drawer somewhere. And yeah, baffling. It's just never really something you set out to achieve, I think. I've always liked science and things like that, but to be a published author in science is now like, that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. You can add that to the CV. So yeah, it's really good. It's just nice to know that it's sort of making a difference. And now it's how can I actually use that published paper to have an impact on women's sports? And I think this is just a start. I either want to write more papers or make sure that the knowledge is out there from the paper. If I can simplify it in any way, shape or form, and make sure that other athletes are educated, then 100%.
And then to wrap it off, just I was wondering, from a friend perspective, what have your teammates, friends been like since it was published? What's their reaction been to it?
Just think I'm a big nerd. Just think I'm a big nerd. They're like, "What are you doing? You should do more kicking practice or something." No, they've been really supportive, like heavily supportive, and really a lot of them have read it. And my friends play all over. So I've got football friends in the WSL, I've got football rugby friends in the Premiership, in the Championship, and loads of them have read it and said, "Do you know what? This is seriously changed my perspective." And it sort of opened up conversations with me, I think, and then a bit more, that they feel they can have those sort of conversations with me and come to me for advice. I had a friend of mine who plays for Aston Villa. She was away in Scotland camp, and they were playing some European qualifiers, and she texted me in the morning. She was like, "I'm going to stop my period. Like, I'm panicking. Like, we're playing a big game today. I'm panicking." I was like, "Okay, fine. Talk to me. What's up?" And we went through it, and she was like, "Oh, okay, I feel better." And I was like, "Well, there you go then. Welcome to my period counselling service, apparently." Like,
Add that to the CV. No, sorry.
Yeah, don't know, it might be my new business. But yeah, everyone's been so supportive, and I think it has opened up that line of communication with friends. People feeling like have those conversations with me. I've had micro conversations at training with players, in the changing rooms, at the lunch, at dinner tables. At training, people sort of said to me, "Oh, it's really cool. I've read Dread and Drab to your paper," or things like this. Can I ask you about this? Can I ask you about this statistic? And I'm like, I'll happily have this conversation with people, because for me, like I said, it's a topic that just needs talking about. It needs inflating. But yeah, everyone's been so supportive and really, really good. And
then lastly, Eloise, I think you alluded to this right at the start, but what's next for you and particularly for this research? What's on the agenda next?
Yeah, it's probably just at the minute keep pushing the research that I've already done, seeing the impact I can try and make on the women's game currently, and seeing if I can get it out there, get all my facts out there and all my research out there, and then hopefully see if I can continue and write more and find out more. I think this is going to be an ongoing project for many years. I don't think in my playing career we're probably going to get an answer to it, but I hope for generations below me we can make the game a safer place, and a more stable sort of environment where people can openly talk about these sort of things, and we can go on and win gold medals in World Cups and Olympic Games without sort of the worry of periods and injuries and missing out on selections and stuff due to it. So yeah, definitely more research, more being a nerd.
Be a nerd all way, because this is amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Eloise. We'll put a link for your research paper in the bio for the podcast, so make sure you go check that out if you fancy a good read. Thank you so much for your time again, and thank you for listening to the RPA, the Players Voice podcast. If you've got a topic that you want to talk about ahead of the upcoming 2024-25 season, then please do let us know using the hashtag #ThePlayersVoice. See you now. Bye bye.